about that too.
All right, thanks, Ray. So the panelists can go ahead and come on up and find a seat. So Nick and Dave, Taylor, Jonathan, Sean, Chris, right up here. So my name is Brad Sims. The position I'm in is called the Statewide Streams and River Systems Biologist position with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I've been in this position 1 year. For those that work with Joanna Griffin, our cold water specialist, this is her old position, and prior to that, Larry Claggett held this position. It's a little bit different than historically. Historically, it was a cold water specialist position, and now it's more encompassing. It includes cold water, warm water, wadeable, non-wadeable streams, working with the hydro projects as well. With that, I've been here for 1 year. Prior to coming to this, I was a fisheries biologist in Southwest Wisconsin, working in the driftless area. Started in 1998. So we have the 6 folks up here, and then do we have Paul online? Do we? With that one. So just to get started, I'll go ahead and hand the microphone over. And if you like, just go ahead and introduce yourself, where you're from and what you do.
Thanks, Brad. My name's Dave Seibel. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Wisconsin DNR stationed in Anago and cover Lincoln and Lake counties.
Nick Burnt, Forest, West Side Forest fish biologist.
I'm Sean Sullivan. I'm a team supervisor for Habitat Crew located on Wild Rose. We run crews all over the Northeast Wisconsin, much like the maps that you saw. I've been doing this for 20 years and look forward to talking to you.
Chris Esther, hydrologist, Forest Service.
Jonathan Piatzquit, habitat specialist, Northeast region of Wisconsin.
Taylor Kern, I'm the fisheries technician with Dave in Lincoln and Lake County for the Wisconsin DNR.
Thank you. And we may or may not have Paul Pichek online, fisheries biologist up in Douglas Bayfield in Ashland County. He works on the cold water resource tributaries that flow into Lake Superior.
Yep, I'm here.
Was that okay, Paul? Did I pronounce your last name right?
Pichek, yes, very good, sir.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So part of the workshops that Ray always finds probably most valuable is both during the organized session, but then also when we're taking our breaks, tours before and a tour after, is just the casual conversations and knowledge exchange that we all have with one another. Whether we agree, disagree, or agree to disagree, we all learn something from one another, whether we've spent 3 weeks in the field or 30 years in the field. We all have something. There's some of us going and can speak our minds while we're up here, and there's some of us that are pretty quiet. And then it's during those relaxed conversations on the side that we probably learn more than what we do in the organized conversations, I feel. So this is really important, Ray. So we're just going to kind of have a open discussion with these guys. We've got 4 questions to ask, and just whoever wants to answer, just raise your hand and we can hand over the microphone to you if you want to grab the microphones there in front of you. So the first question we've got here is, what do you see as habitat issues in your area? Who wants to step up first? Sean, you're really open.
Yeah. Go first. So, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty huge question, really. Pretty much all of them will be. We touched on a lot of it with our other presenters. Education is huge. We have, there's still a lot of people that believe the earth is flat. That says enough in itself. And that is huge. We all as leaders, I see a lot of young people here. I'm going to throw that out there too. I would urge you guys all to use your voices. I kept my head down and I love my job because I get to work on a river every day. I go from one river to another river. But what I didn't do more of 10 years ago was talk to and educate people. I had so many, I started doing way more presentations 5 years ago, and I had many people come up to me and say, I would have never agreed to, keep that dam in place if I would have known any of the stuff that you explained to me on my presentation. So that's a huge issue, is education. The other one is invasive species. We have emerald ash borer is making its way up here, you guys. And for those that you guys are actually living in the golden era of beautiful landscape right now, and you're going to see that tomorrow. Those of you that go on the field trip, and those of you that are really good with plants, keep your head on a swivel and point out any kind of invasives that you guys see. Thankfully, there's not a whole lot of them in the Menominee Indian Reservation. It's relatively untouched. We have tons of buckthorn, tons of spotted knapweed, Japanese knotweed, again, emerald ash borer. We have all of these things in the occupied zone to the south of us, which to me is Highway 29. I work all over the Northeast region. I love coming up here because I stop looking for invasives. What do those do? Well, they are incredible. They are a mess. We cannot talk natural stream progression, wood progression. Everybody's got a plan till 1,000 elms per acre die within 3 years of each other, and they all fall over. And that is unacceptable to the general public. It's unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to all of us. That is not natural wood recruitment. It is unsafe for our citizens that fish, hunt, bird watch, and do everything there. It's a nightmare, you guys. So that's pretty much, those are my big ones, our education and invasive species. Our rivers will be here long after we are gone. We are caretakers, and the best things that we can do for them is just enough to keep them flowing and to keep them healthy, and to integrate people into our rivers as well. We are all children of the Great Lakes. The Fertile Crescent really is a Johnstown moraine that runs just to where's Nelson? Yeah, I mean, you guys, that's the start of all of our fantastic water in the Great Lakes. And you guys know what's happening out west. We're going to be in some interesting things. Some interesting things are going to be going on, especially in you 20-somethings careers, but it'll be going on in the next 5 years. People are going to be trying to do things with our Great Lakes that we can either allow to have happen or not. And again, it starts with education. So those are my big ones. Again, the rest of them are pretty tame. I don't know who wants to.
So, Paul, you're in a little bit different area in what we've been discussing today in regards to the cold water resources flowing in Lake Superior. What are you guys seeing up there as far as habitat issues?
Yeah, some of the main things. I mean, Sean hit a real good one there. Everybody here okay in the room?
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, Sean really hit on a lot of that, is that education component, because what you're going to have in here, as diverse as fishing lures are, if we're specifically talking about fish habitat, you're going to have 10 anglers using 10 different colored flies or lures or whatever else, and you're going to have 10 different ideas on what habitat modification should be made. And it's about incorporating those concepts that we heard really, really well explained today. Taking those and doing what John does in that first talk, is distilling this information down so that we can create this linkage between the science community and the general public to kind of foster that understanding into something that's a project that was going to work for everybody, at least in terms of understanding its intent. Now, obviously, there's a monitoring need and components from there. But in terms of the technicals, at least here on Lake Superior, is the educational component on, say, legacy versus contemporary and modern sedimentation and stream channels. I mean, that's a big thing in the Lake Superior tributaries, which are home to lake-run salmonids like coho salmon, Chinook salmon, brown trout, steelhead, to residents, rainbow trout as well, and brown trout and brook trout. So what you're doing is looking for ways to improve the habitats for all these different species. And in addition to just fishing the river and making those changes to the river, what you're doing is creating habitats that allow those species to naturally propagate to then out migrate to the lake, and that supports an entire near shore fishery, whether you're casting offshore or you're trolling. So you have this really unique system here where your fisheries are supporting river systems and Lake Superior proper. And so working with all the behavioral and life history traits of all those species is a really important component in terms of what you need to do with habitat, especially when it comes to sedimentation and how the legacy and contemporary, land management actions can affect them.
Oh, thanks, Paul. So we're gonna put Dave Seibel on the spot. Go ahead and pass that microphone down to Dave there, Sean. We'll see what Dave has to say with regards to his issues they're having in your area.
Is it on? Yes, okay. Since Chris just talked about it, I think road crossings, both culvert and bridges are a big issue, and that connectivity and transport of all the important stream functions. And then the other one that I see is watershed and riparian land use and management, even like timber harvesting. I think, us resource professionals need to work closely with our counterparts in the other disciplines. And, you bring up emerald ash borer, and something that wasn't even on my radar screen until a few weeks ago, talking with one of our DNR foresters, and he was asking about maybe planting some hardwood trees in a lowland forest along a trout stream. And it was because that if once emerald ash borers kill all the pretty significant amount of ash in that lowland forest, he's worried that the groundwater table will come up and we'll lose that forested component. And what tends to come in a disturbed situation are invasives, reed canary grass, buckthorn, other things. So that's what I got.
Well, thanks, Dave. So does anybody else have anything to add off this first
I
question?
guess I'll go. I'd like to see some longer lived, bigger trees in the national forest. A lot of places I work, you get like one super canopy white pine on the shore of a nice brook trout stream where there probably used to be quite a few. And from what the ecologists tell me where I'm working, we really got to be more aggressive in planting some of those pine trees and hemlocks, things like that, kind of where hardwoods have taken over. So that's a challenge I'm looking at, and I kind of want to address going forward.
So Chris, Jonathan, or Taylor, you guys have anything to add over and above what's been said already, or should we move on? So one of the things is, whether you're in geology or forestry or fisheries, when we come into our science, we kind of learn, the current methodologies and knowledge and how we approach a project and how we finish a project. And it kind of sticks with it through most of our careers. It's kind of ingrained in us. But then as we go on, hopefully we're flexible enough to, take newer knowledge and research and science and information and apply that to our resources to make them even better yet. So going forward, I guess, in your management areas, what are you looking at as far as new techniques or new methodology compared to just traditional methodology and habitat management techniques that we currently use? So is anybody looking at, consider anything or bringing in anything new? And this goes to not only just implementation, but planning and design and outreach, all aspects of it. So not just the in-stream component, so to speak.
I'm holding onto the mic, so I'll try to keep it under 2 minutes. We do, so the system I explained earlier with, all these dead ash trees and buckthorn, glossy European, those are actually building materials for all of you guys as resource managers. You can either take a bad situation and turn it into something wonderful, or you can spend a ton of money and not gain anything by its removal. And I'm not even going to bring up reed canary here, but reed canary grass, the community of plants that stabilizes our soil and our riparian. If it's dominant, reed canary dominant, then what would recruitment look like pre-settlement is pretty much out the window. There's so many, and that's a separate presentation, but you still have to deal with the reed canary that's underneath the buckthorn, that's underneath the ash. But in the meantime, all of those negative things, you can make log sills, make sweepers. If you guys have any more, if you want any info on, we've been doing, primarily what we do is large woody debris anchorment and placement in brush bundles, and some of the stuff that was mentioned earlier. That is what we do because we work off of trout stamp. And those are phenomenal ways to increase holding potential on a trout stream for not a whole lot of money. And we do not have a whole lot of money to do what we do. And we try to get 10 to 12 miles of stream work done annually. And you can do that quite simply by just doing invasive species removal and then replace it, and place it in stream for habitat. But there are a lot of complexities to all of that. But again, if you guys want to go on tours or you want more information, feel free to reach out to me. But that's all I have. Anybody else? And that's been a shift. I mean, that's been a shift for when I first started in 2000, 2001. We were doing, the best available science back then was bank cover to tip deflector, bank cover to tip deflector, bank cover to tip deflector. And most all of us old school guys in the DNR that was the best science that we had back then. And also plant reed canary on everything. Somebody get a guitar, sing Kumbaya, and we'll put it in the rearview mirror. And I have a history in our area that goes back. My shop started in 1958 where I work, and I have all of their data, all their maps, all their info. I have a museum of failures of trout habitat, and I've had to deal with all of that. So.
Yeah. So I just want to touch a little bit, what Sean was saying. I think one of the biggest lessons we can learn is, we tried to do things in areas that, weren't a component of the landscape. So like Sean said, now instead of, bringing structures in and things like that, we're using the wood that's on the landscape and trying to mimic what Mother Nature already does, rather than trying to force it into an idea that, we thought it should be. So that's one of the biggest things I'm hoping you take away from the field trip tomorrow. We haven't done much stream alteration at all. All our wood recruitment is pretty much natural. And so hopefully you can get an idea of, what a reference condition might be. So, but I think, that's one of the biggest things we can learn is, whatever part of the state we're in, different techniques might apply, but, trying to find those reference zones and then mimic that rather than this is just how we do it. So.
Anyone else want to jump in, or is everybody good? So, go ahead, Taylor.
So I started my career as an LTE on a brush crew, and I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. One thing I want to try and look for, especially after hearing Nick talk, is breaking the tag alder succession that just keeps repeating itself, whether that's planting trees, being persistent with brushing, letting the riparian corridor encroach in and shade it from the outside in. It's interesting at a conference like this. I never met Nick before, but see a lot of similarities in my work and his work. So that's one thing I want to kind of look for advances in, is really vegetation management.
All right, so moving over to the next subject, with all of us in this room, when we work, we've got our coworkers we work with, cohort, so to speak. We've got our customers, we've got external partners that we work with. So the next question for the panelists is, when you're looking at applying new techniques, for instance, in Big Spring in Iowa and Grant counties, we discontinued beaver removal. And we had a lot of negative feedback from the trout anglers initially, and and we had to go through some education processes, and finally ended up getting some acceptance. So I guess when you're looking at these projects, what do you see as far as challenges in regards to acceptance and resistance when you try a new methodology and something that's not traditional, so to speak, for your area? And, you know, how have you handled that, you know, now, and maybe how do we handle it in the future? And do you see that? Do you see resistance, you know, or do you see a lot of acceptance with the customers that you work with? And it could be anglers, recreational users such as paddlers with that. It could be your, you know, people you work with in the field, you know, your own coworkers, your own agency, and then also our external partners. So Paul, you get to jump on there. I see your hand moving.
Sure. Yeah, I would just start off by saying finding 100% agreement is not likely almost in any situation. Again, drawing back on that little fishing lure example, you're going to have 10 people slinging 10 different things and all have a different idea of what it's going to be. Of course, until one person catches a fish on the pattern, all of a sudden all 10 of them become doing that, you know. But that's the level of education sometimes, or at least the convincing that happens. And there's going to be a lot of that in any new technique. And you know, I've seen it already as a property manager for some of the South Shore fishery area. You know, if we have foresters proposing a cut on the fishery area property that's supposed to be, you know, basically maintained passively. However, there's a cut that's proposed, and then a local landowner who abuts the property wants to keep that as all forest, obviously for aesthetic purposes and perhaps, you know, any potential wind damage and things like this. However, it's all taking in the long-term perspective of converting some of these forests into long-lived conifer species that aren't necessarily out there now. So in a way, it's again kind of catalyzing the succession process. And in doing that, it takes a little bit of reasoning and understanding to work with landowners to show that that is what we're going for here. We're just not clear cutting the entire thing. You know, it's a kind of a brand new idea to some landowners, and in fact, even to the foresters themselves. But when you start breaking things down and looking at it in a different perspective, that makes all the difference.
Anyone else want to chime in? I see Sean smile. I know you got something to say, Sean. You always do. You can have something to say. See, there we go. I knew it.
No, and so part of my excitement, which is why I tend to talk quite a lot, is because, like I told you earlier, I kept my head down and did a job that I loved and continue to do it for forever. And I wish that I would have been more vocal probably 10 years ago on a variety of topics, and this is one of them. And this comes down to education as well. What we're talking about, you know, and those of you that could be implementing projects. These were all phenomenal presenters, and thank you guys all for your time, and thank you, Ray, for organizing this, and Jonathan. We have a ton to learn. If you are choosing this career and I tell this to my kids, and I've got a 19 and a 14-year-old, and they grew up going to Trout Unlimited work days, canoeing rivers, kayaking rivers, doing this idyllic lifestyle that we have as Great Lakes kids. They, you know, shockingly choose natural resources as their fields to go into, which I don't know that I could. I wasn't trying to do that, but it is a great career. But if you're going into this to turn the key off and walk away from it, this isn't a factory job. This isn't, you know, this isn't something that you can just shut the key down and walk away and rest easy. You know, if that's your, you know, maybe you'll find a niche in this field that's not, this is a perpetual learning field. And kind of going along with that question is what do you do if, you know, somebody has conflict or somebody doesn't agree with what you say? Well, you know, what's your solution? We all work as team members to complete our projects. And I love it. If somebody's willing to argue about something on a trout stream, I love that. You know, you know, I'd rather be arguing that than whether or not the earth's flat, right? I mean, they're there caring from the get-go because they're arguing. They're getting jacked up because they love this river or rivers in general. So I don't have a problem with it. Bring on any criticism that you have. We're trying to do the best that we can. We always try in this field, in our agency, and it doesn't matter, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the DNR, it's all still the same thing. We try to do the best that we can with what we have and the most ecologically sound principles throughout and the most idealistic. And then humans make us rein that reality in. What do you mean you want to, free span, ditch culverts, who wants culverts, man? I want free span. I want 1.5 times free span. That's that, but that, and then look at the cost, Chris, you guys do that stuff. Well, the free span's 8 times as much. Money still rules kind of ecology in some regards. This is fish and people. It's not just fish, but that's my tangent. Anybody else?
So we'll keep things moving along here. Then we'll go to the last question of the day for our panelists. And that's looking at all the presenters we had and the knowledge that was shared today. Looking at the subject matter of things that were discussed through this workshop, what do you see taking forward from this workshop and applying it to our habitat management here in Wisconsin in regards to whether it be new methodology, things that we have in common that we continue to do through that. So, I guess I can kind of get things started. One thing that we were discussing, I was fortunate enough to be able to go on the tours yesterday with everybody. And, I'll be honest with you, after, 24 years and then, plus probably 27, 28 years in the field, the importance of a geologist in the car with a fisheries biologist, you didn't think you'd ever connect it to, but then after talking with Ellen and Nelson yesterday, you can see our water resources and the geology and how things were formed over the years connect with one another and form one another. And regarding to looking at reference streams, we were talking about that yesterday, in looking below the surface of the water and below the surface of the land, and looking at the geology and what that's telling us on maybe what things should be or the way they want to be compared with the disturbances that have happened above that prevented them to be that way. And that's something that I'll keep in mind from here on out is, that there is that resource out there when we do want to answer some questions.
I guess I'll just touch on that briefly. Some of the, just like you said, I think one of the biggest issues we have is trying to bring the interdisciplines together. And, you had a pretty good example here at Menominee where, the forestry department works pretty close with the tribe, with the ordinances to make sure that, we're protecting our water through the other things that we're doing. And another example of that would be, with the culvert talk, we're able to do some of that stuff up here as well because we do our own permitting. So when permits came through back in the day, it's like they just threw whatever culvert they had laying around. That's what they put in. And after doing some of these workshops and stuff over the years back when I was here, we go out and we permit those culverts. We try to get the right size and do all those things. Just like you said, it's not just organism passing and other things, but it has reduced, like he said, the failure rate. So it's like, you want to go in every year and fix a culvert, or you want to put it in right the first time for more money, but it's going to be more resilient. So I think, that's kind of what we got to be looking at into the future is the whole resiliency part of the equation. And that's where some of these new techniques that we're coming in, using a lot more wood and stuff like that. If that moves around in the stream, it's fine. If you're putting in other type structures and they move around, now you got something that, doesn't look natural. But if a log breaks loose and it just repositions somewhere else, it's still habitat. So.
Does anybody else have anything to add? If not, we'll wrap things up here. So, okay, Ray's got the big one.
We're running over time very nicely here. How do I get in a place where I won't have this feedback? And what we can do is just merge these folks with what's supposed to be the next program, is having the speakers up here dealing with things. You just have the speakers still sit where they are and maybe chime in on some of this, including what I'm going to ask now. This is an old problem. It came up very sharply on a little field trip that a couple of us in the room now were on with some folks in part of Wisconsin about 10 years ago. And that is that most stream habitat projects that are being done, particularly by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, but I think it's the same in other states and with a lot of federal projects, these are piecemeal. They happen where you can get legal access to the stream and do the work. And this is on land that's owned or owned by the government or has easement, right? Otherwise, you can't go on it, right? So this may be a half mile here and a quarter mile there and 2 miles there, up and down, back and forth, every which way in a stream. But then at this field trip we were on, somebody with some geomorphological knowledge said, well, here on this piece of stream that you folks are planning to have a project, that was Trout Unlimited project, by the way, have you had a geomorphological analysis of the whole system? So you know what's coming at you from upstream, and you know how you're going to be affecting what's going on downstream. Have you done this? And the person who was sort of leading the program said, oh, we couldn't do that. It would cost $10,000. It's ridiculous. No, we're not going to do that. And I thought to myself afterwards, when I had some time to think, of course, you don't think of it right on the spot well enough. Well, $10,000, that would be great to avoid making a $50,000 or a $100,000 mistake. And a lot of those mistakes have been made, I'm afraid. Yeah. So how are we going to get the system of stream so-called restoration or habitat work into a form in which we have the proper analysis of the whole system geomorphologically and ecologically, so we aren't wasting money and doing damage? Who can speak to that? Ellen, would you have something to say? Sean and Dave.
That's a societal question like that.
How about it?
That's a big one.
I would say a good starting point would be to have people with geomorphic or watershed science training on the teams that are working for the agencies or for Trout Unlimited. A lot of national forests units have a district or a watershed, or excuse me, a forest hydrologist who has geomorphic training. It's like any other discipline. You have a certain mindset and a certain way of looking at the landscape and thinking about it. And it's best way to do it is to draw on the expertise of those folks. So incorporate them into the team that's thinking about or designing a specific restoration project.
That's important. Have a team. It should be a team effort. We have Lori Tate here from the administration, and we have Brad Sims. There you are, who is really an administrative position now. What is the procedure now that you go through in approving a project anyway? And how might that need to be changed?
Well, a lot of it will depend on, I'm going to scoot over here with you, Ray. So, a lot of it's going to depend on your location, where you're at, your local resource, and who you currently have working with partners. But as far as our typical trout habitat projects, and I can speak for some of the ones I used to work on, it starts with the local field level. It starts with talking to landowners. Starting with concerned anglers, and then also just the local knowledge of the local biologist and the technician that may be working in that area. And so whenever we're out in the field, primarily doing our surveys, time after time, we begin to view a problem, whether it's a stream stretch or a watershed issue at a large landscape scale. And so typically where it starts is with us during our work planning process to actually just propose that project in our work planning process. If it's a small stream stretch where we want to do habitat work, we feel, let's say, for instance, we feel there's a stream that's not meeting its potential in regards to the carrying capacity for the trout. Maybe there's a, excessive erosion. Maybe the stream's widen beyond what it should be. We'll submit that for a project within our work planning system. And then if that gets approved, we'll take that funding and then we'll look for possible cost shares whether it's working with the local county or NRCS and land conservation districts or other partners in Trout Unlimited to see if somebody else would like to come on board and add additional funding to help complete the project with that. But it's all starting at the local level. Historically, it was all pretty monotypic. It was the Department of Natural Resources, fisheries biologists with the operations crews, and we'd go out and do the project on our own. As time has progressed, we've started to incorporate more external partners, both other governmental agencies, as well as non-government organizations in these projects as well. And it's gone from 100% trout stamp funding to where now we are looking at external grants and then also donations from partnerships as well with that. So once we've got this project designed, as far as the implementation goes, the review of the project comes at the local level as well as our supervisory level. And there is kind of what we're looking at as a process of prioritization to where we do look at these projects and prioritize them to where we can get the, for lack of a better term, the most bang for our buck, what's going to be the best for the particular watershed or the cold water resource or warm water resource that we're particularly working on with that. And then we oversee it also at the local level through the completion of the project with that. So depending on where you are and the scope of the project, the smaller projects are typically just local within the habitat operations crew or the local field office. When we start getting on these larger watershed scale projects or larger stream projects, or if we identify the Blue River, for instance, if we die a large stretch of the Blue River we want to work on, that's when we start to see the NRCS, County Land Conservation Department, the local fisheries staff. We have our water reg and zoning program that evaluates these, in regards to the permitting of those as well. And then we also submit those to the Army Corps of Engineers for permitting as well, looking at that. But in regards to the scope of the design of those projects and the implementation of them, the large scale projects is when we really bring in the external partners for looking at other ideas and approaches and whether or not there's any other concerns that we're not seeing or any other type of design factors that we're not seeing to include in those particular projects. So is that kind of looking at it, I guess? So a lot of it just depends on the scale of the project. So the larger the scale, it seems like the more programs we have involved.
Appreciate that. And fitting in again with something that Ellen brought up about the team effort. We've got sort of a saying within our field now that biologists don't know much about geomorphology, and geomorphologists don't know much about biology, particularly about fish. But we're seeing now, particularly since we had Colin Thorne come here 3 years ago, and since we've had the example that of having Ellen here and some others, that this is being overcome, that it's happening both ways too. So this is one of the benefits of having workshops like this and other symposia and conferences around the country. So it's very gratifying to see us all learning from each other and having this lifelong learning. Anybody else have any comments or matters to bring up? Lori, please.
I just want to add that Brad is also, I think, co-lead or co-lead, I guess, of our sort of newish habitat team. So with our latest sort of reorganization in the DNR, we have these new habitat specialists, including Jonathan and Nate here in the room. And I think that's a good sort of a statewide collaborative group where we could bring in some of that expertise on geomorphology and have that in the room there as they talk about project prioritization and the criteria and guidance for our biologists across the state.
Thanks very much, Lori. Yes.
Thank you. So a lot of you talked about how education is really important and outreach, and I agree. So far in my career, that has looked like an individual citizen sees me doing a job, and then I explain what I'm doing to them, hopefully getting on their level. What are your other ideas about good education and outreach, either from an individual level or from a programmatic level, so that we can reach more people?
I'm not sure if this is a phenomenon here, but certainly in my part of the country, there are a lot of watershed groups. So there are, they're named after a specific watershed. It's a citizens group that cares about that watershed. They have often at least annual meetings, and they're looking for people to talk to them about their watershed, about understanding processes in the watershed. So that type of thing is really good. Local, what should I call them? I guess they're not really, well, NGOs. So the local chapters of the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, whatever it may be. If you have river keepers, there's a lot of different groups out there that are even just natural history buffs organizations where they have seminar series and they're looking for speakers.
The Nature Conservancy here too.
The Nature Conservancy, absolutely. Talking to those folks, letting them know that you're willing to talk. They're usually looking for speakers who can present information in an accessible manner. So that can be very effective.
And we have local chapters of Trout Unlimited here, big influence, yeah. And it's just wonderful how that's developing. I mean, when I first started work for the Conservation Department in 1957, the big thing was holding county quota meetings. Can you imagine what a county quota meeting was? Does anybody here know what a county quota meeting was? It was getting together with the game wardens and the fish hatchery crews and deciding how many hatchery raised fish were going to be available in the county, and arguing about the quota for each stream, with sportsmen plugging here for their stream and others arguing for theirs. That was the big thing, stocking fish. And of course, these hatchery fish were pampered, semi-domesticated animals. They didn't know how to perform in the wild. If they were stocked out there and not even fished for, they didn't live very long. If they were fished for and the fishermen went after them, first day of the fishing season, big rush, get those fish that were stocked at the bridges. And so that took care of a lot of them, and a few survived to the next year. So that was the big thing then. And what are we talking about now? Habitat. What a tremendous improvement that is. Yep. So that's all very gratifying to see what's happening, and particularly with Trout Unlimited and the way the agencies have gone. So that's something I wanted to emphasize. Yes.
Can I ask you a question about the rate? Did you in those rooms? Did you, as someone who's put this together in those rooms, know that that was the wrong approach? Or getting back to what the progression of the science has been, has that been sort of a natural progression? Was there a group of you guys that kind of understood that that wasn't the best way to do it, or was that just what it was then?
Some of us sure felt that way, yeah. And well, I mean, if you have any experience with wild fish, you know what they look like. They're beautiful. Whether you're talking about a brown trout, a brook trout, a bluegill, a sunfish. And the first time I was ever taken trout fishing, and the guy who taught me to trout fish gave me 10 minutes of instruction and put me out on a mayfly hatch at 9 p.m. on the McCann River. And he said, you just cast 4 feet above whatever you see rising there, and then let the fly drift over him and you'll get that fish. And he knew he put me on a riffle below a bridge where they had stocked fish before. Yeah. And all those fish they stocked were 7 inches. 7 inches was the legal limit. And right away, I caught a bunch of them. I caught 3 of those fish. Yeah. And with the flashlight, I looked at them in the creel. And what are these grayish, purplish? Well, I know they're brown trout, but good heavens, they're nowhere near as nice as bluegills and perch that I catch in Lake Mendota. They're ridiculous. They're horrible looking. Yeah. What's going on here? Yeah. And then the men picked each other up on the line from the fishing at night. And I got in the car and they said, well, did you catch anything? And I said, yeah, I got 3 of those things. Those things, you don't talk about trout as things. Those are trout, man. Yeah. Well, I didn't really respect the fish. And then as I learned, and particularly later became a biologist, I learned why they're so horrible looking fish. They were from a hatchery. They weren't the real thing. Yep. So some of us knew that and kind of plugged against it. And that's the one way Trout Unlimited got started, on the banks of the Osable River in Michigan. And I worked in Michigan and I met the guy and was taken on the river by the fellow who was involved in starting on Trout Unlimited. It was in his cottage on that river that it started. And he told me we were really concerned with the way the state of Michigan was emphasizing stocking fish instead of what really needed to be done. So there were a lot of us who felt that way, but in most cases, it was the agrarian mentality that we all have. Yeah, we're all farmers and carpenters at heart, right? And we think in order to have something, we have to plant it. Yeah, and in order to have something else, we have to build it. We don't have faith in nature. And I think we're learning now that nature knows best. Yeah.
I was wondering if people would be willing to share any measurables they have for success and failures, and not necessarily right now, but if we could get in touch after we're done talking, that'd be great. Over where I live, we have a lot of controversy on how to measure success and failure with projects, and especially the variability in, stream, river size, steepness, everything.
What are some of the ways that people evaluate the success over there?
I'm not really sure. People are putting a financial number on things, and the amount of maintenance that has to go into maintaining a project is one way that they're measuring it. If a structure holds, they look at that as a success. If it blows out, they look at it as a failure. It's just like ignorance measurables right now. So we're trying to define more and way open-minded to hearing what other people have to offer.
Yeah, any ideas on how we should be evaluating the success of our efforts?
Sure, there's a lot though. I mean, what time is it? And what they're doing is measuring game fish. It's a simplest, most quantifiable. Look
Is
at
what?
the beautiful
Is what?
fish. They're measuring game fish. They're measuring game fish response to holding cover.
Yeah. How does the fish population respond?
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And it's easy to do. But the question is like, what about the macroinvertebrates? What about non-game fish? What about non-game species in general? Longevity, aesthetics. I could show you some crazy, beautiful projects that were great. I've got the black and white photos. They were great for 10 years, and now they suck. To me, the measure should be 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, it's like forestry. Really good foresters look at a stand of soil or the aspect to it, or a stand of trees, and they can see what that's going to be It'll auto-populate through their eyes into their mind in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year increments. Those are good foresters. With what we do, we're looking at resiliency over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Ideally, when we do a project, I want anybody to even know that what they're looking at is a project. And I don't want to, I want it to be functional for at least 20, 30 years. And if it fails and its response to the river's sediment bed load transport or above and below that river, if it loses connectivity, then that's a failure also, above and below that. I'm just going to quick mention, Ray, we kind of got corrupted and went all over the place, but why do we, saying that the DNR only works in a certain reach, that is typically the only reach that we are given. And the greater reality of that conversation is that if you're familiar with an endemic drainage system, which is what all of our trout streams are, they're like a leaf. When you hold the leaf up and you see the main stem and all the little veins feeding the main stem, that is what our trout streams are. Those of you that are new to Wisconsin, this is your first time running around, enjoy. Find a river and chase it. Find a river and chase it and look for every one of the bridges, culverts. Our endemic drainage systems are broken. They're broken everywhere. And in some case, all that we have is this section between two dams. It holds a lot of fish. Should we give up on that? It's all state land. Of course they gave it to the state. It's hemmed in with two dams. It has beautiful water quality. It has beautiful potential. Do we just give up on, a half mile of stream? Absolutely not. It has great access to anglers. We improve that. So it's out of our control. And we as a society need to, we need to recognize that all water runs into it. It runs into another source of water. And until we can do that societally, I don't know, townships, counties, they all put their own culverts in. It always blows me away. Has everybody seen that in this room? I mean, raise your hand if you've seen where the county just rolled into, some road and like stuck a 10-inch tube in a spring. I would rather see those guys getting, reprimanded or fined or something, or I would, we need to start there.
What about educated? Yeah.
Yeah, educated. Yeah, well, seriously, if we had these conversations and included like the township of Shawano County, you'd see some red faces if we explained how to do it the proper way. And that's what we all need to start doing. We all need to be prepared to be those people. You asked about presentation. Do many of them and try to get better at everyone that you do. Have a friend grade you and tell you what you sucked at. Go do a presentation of fifth graders. That's educational, man. I did, fifth graders and then seventh graders.
What you're talking about now, Sean, is really important. A lot of us went into this field because we wanted to get away from people and deal with nice things like fish and wildlife and so on. But people are the problem. We are the problem. And the thing is, and that's what was wrong with fish stocking. Yeah. Raising fish in hatcheries was a way to overcome the hard issues of trying to implement regulations on fishing and taking care of habitat destruction. And then when we got into habitat, building stuff in creeks was a lot easier than dealing with people and solving the core problems of what the people were doing to the landscape. So really, we need to be out there working with the communities like Tracy Hames does in such good ways with respect to wetlands. We need to do more of that with respect to stream restoration too, because the problem is coming from out there on the land with what we've been doing. Okay, I think that's enough to end this session with. It's been a great session. I really want to thank all the speakers and our panel here and you all for coming. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next year somewhere. We don't know where yet. This is a marvelous meeting place, by the way, but we're going to be talking about beaver next year.
Thanks. Get us together, Rick.